The message arrived at Station Harmony on a Tuesday morning, transmitted through the standard diplomatic channels that connected thousands of worlds across the galaxy. Velthar read it 3 times before the words fully registered in his crystalline mind. The planet Earth requests membership in the Galactic Council. Another new species. Velthar had processed dozens of these applications over his 2-century career as a council representative. Most followed the same pattern. A young civilization discovers faster-than-light travel, realizes they're not alone in the universe, and immediately seeks the protection and trade opportunities that council membership provides. Usually these species were herbivores or simple omnivores who had barely figured out agriculture before stumbling onto space technology. He pulled up Earth's preliminary data on his workstation. The planet sat in what humans called the Sol system, a single yellow star with 8 planets. Earth itself looked pleasant enough: blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in familiar weather patterns. The preliminary scans showed a species that called itself human, though the biological data seemed incomplete. Bipedal mammals, Velthar read aloud to himself. Omnivorous diet, average height 1.7 meters, forward-facing eyes. He paused at that last detail. Forward-facing eyes usually meant predators, but the rest of the data suggested a typical peaceful species. Perhaps it was an evolutionary leftover from their primitive past. The humans had requested a formal diplomatic meeting, which was standard procedure. Velthar approved the request and sent the invitation through proper channels. He expected the usual delegation: nervous scientists, peaceful philosophers, maybe a few timid leaders hoping to trade resources for technology and protection. 3 weeks later, the human ship docked at Station Harmony. Velthar watched through the observation deck as the humans disembarked. They moved with purpose, their steps measured and confident. Each human wore identical dark clothing, what their transmission had identified as business suits. The fabric looked expensive, perfectly fitted to each individual. Their hair was neat, their movements controlled. The lead human approached the reception area where Velthar waited with Mordek, the station's reptilian security chief. The human stopped at exactly the right distance for formal introduction. Not too close to seem aggressive, not too far to appear fearful. He had calculated the optimal position for first contact. "I am Kim Do-hyun, representing the planet Earth," the human said. His voice was calm, steady, and carried an undertone that Velthar couldn't quite identify. "We appreciate the Council's willingness to meet with us." Velthar extended his greeting appendage in the traditional manner. "Welcome to Station Harmony. I am Velthar of the Zanari Federation. This is Mordek, our security coordinator." Kim. Do-hyun shook Velthar's appendage with exactly the right amount of pressure. Too many new species either barely touched or gripped too hard. This human had studied their customs and calibrated his response perfectly. "May I introduce my colleagues?" Do-hyun gestured to the other humans. "Park Suman, our chief negotiator. Lee Jae-won, my aide." Park Suman stepped forward with a smile that seemed genuine but somehow calculated. She was smaller than Do-hyun but carried herself with equal confidence. "We're honored by this opportunity," she said. "Earth looks forward to contributing to galactic civilization." Lee Jae-won simply nodded. He stood slightly behind the others, his eyes constantly moving around the room. Velthar noticed he seemed to catalog every exit, every potential threat, every defensive position. For a diplomatic aide, he showed unusual situational awareness. "Please, follow me to the conference room," Velthar said. As they walked through the station's corridors, he tried to make small talk. "How was your journey? First time in space for your species?" "Actually, no," Do-hyun replied. "We've been traveling in our local system for some time. This is simply our first interstellar diplomatic mission." "Ah, so you've had space technology for a while?" "Several decades," Suman answered. "We've been preparing." The way she said preparing made Velthar's crystalline structure vibrate slightly. There was something deliberate about it, as if they had been preparing for something specific. But preparing for what? In the conference room, the humans sat across from the council representatives. Velthar had assembled a standard first contact team, himself, Mordek, and Thexan, an aquatic representative who specialized in resource allocation. Let's begin with basic information about your species, Velthar said, activating the recording system. How many humans are there? Approximately 8 billion, Dohyun answered without hesitation. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. 8 billion was enormous for a single planet. Most council species numbered in the millions when they achieved spaceflight. That's quite a population, Thexan gurgled through his water-breathing apparatus. How do you manage resources with so many individuals? Efficiently, Suman said with that calculated smile. We've developed sophisticated systems for resource allocation, population management, and optimization. Again, something in her tone made Velthar uncomfortable. The way she said optimization suggested processes that went far beyond simple resource distribution. What about your social structure? Mordek asked. Do you have a unified government? Multiple governments, Dohyun explained, but we've established effective cooperation protocols for matters of mutual interest. Such, as Velthar prompted, trade agreements, security arrangements, conflict resolution. The phrase conflict resolution made Mordek's scales shift color slightly, a sign of unease among his species. You have conflicts? We had conflicts. J1 spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. We resolved them. How? Thexan asked. The three humans exchanged glances. It was a brief moment, but Velthar caught something in that exchange. Information passed between them without words, some kind of silent communication that spoke of long practice working together. Through negotiation, Suman said finally. We found that most conflicts arise from resource competition or miscommunication. Once you address those root causes systematically, resolution becomes straightforward. Velthar made notes on his tablet, but his attention was divided. These humans spoke about conflict resolution like it was a solved problem. Every species had conflicts. It was part of intelligent life. But these humans discussed it like mathematicians talking about a completed equation. What can Earth offer? The galactic community? He asked, changing the subject. Dohyun leaned forward slightly. We're excellent at organization, problem solving, making systems work more efficiently. We've had extensive experience in optimization. There was that word again. Velthar was beginning to understand that when humans said optimization, they meant something much more comprehensive than simple improvement. We're also quite good at understanding different perspectives, Suman added, reading situations, adapting our approach based on who we're working with. As she spoke, her eyes moved across each council member in turn. Velthar felt like she was analyzing him, studying his reactions, his body language, his responses. It was subtle but unmistakable once he noticed it. What kind of trade relationships interest you? Thexan asked. We're flexible, Suman replied. We're excellent at finding mutually beneficial arrangements, understanding what each party values most, and structuring agreements accordingly. The meeting continued for another hour. The humans answered every question professionally, providing detailed information about Earth's capabilities, resources, and interests. But Velthar left the conference room with more questions than answers. These humans were unlike any species he'd encountered. They were too prepared, too confident, too precise. Every word seemed calculated, every gesture deliberate. They spoke about conflict, competition, and optimization like experts discussing familiar tools. As he walked back to his office, Velthar realized something disturbing. He had spent decades meeting with peaceful species seeking council protection. But these humans hadn't asked for protection. They hadn't requested military assistance or defensive agreements. They had simply requested membership, as if protection was irrelevant to them. The business suits suddenly seemed less like formal diplomatic attire and more like uniforms. Professional, efficient uniforms worn by individuals who approached diplomacy the same way they apparently approached everything else, with systematic precision and careful preparation. Velthar settled into his office and began drafting his preliminary report. But as he wrote, one thought kept returning. These humans had spent decades preparing for first contact. The question was, preparing for what, exactly? The human delegation had been on Station Harmony for 1 week when the first incident occurred. Velthar was reviewing the daily reports when his communication system chimed. The message came from the station's hospitality coordinator, a nervous Falarian named Kixtel who managed the diplomatic quarters. Representative Velthar, the message read, I need to discuss some unusual behaviors from our human guests. 20 minutes later, Velthar sat in Kixtel's office while the coordinator wrung his thin appendages together. They're not doing anything wrong, Kixtel said quickly. Please understand that, but the other diplomats are becoming uncomfortable. What kind of discomfort? Well, yesterday Ambassador Zilov from the collective was in the common area when the human female, Park Suman, joined her for what seemed like casual conversation. Velthar waited. The collective were an insectoid hive mind species, generally peaceful but extremely private about their internal workings. Suman asked simple questions, Kixtel continued, about collective culture, their decision-making processes, how they handle disagreements between hive clusters, normal diplomatic curiosity. That sounds appropriate. Yes, but Kixtel paused, searching for words. Ambassador Zilov said it felt like being dissected. Suman somehow got her to reveal information about internal collective politics that she never intended to share. Details about resource allocation between clusters, power structures, even personal conflicts among the ruling council. Velthar frowned. The collective were notoriously secretive about internal affairs. Getting them to discuss cluster politics was nearly impossible under normal circumstances. Zilov said Suman didn't push or pressure her. She just asked the right questions at the right moments, like she understood exactly which emotional buttons to press. Perhaps Suman is naturally skilled at conversation. That's what worries Zilov, Kixtel said. How did a first contact species know which emotional buttons the collective had? Before Velthar could respond, another chime indicated an incoming message. This one came from the station's commercial district coordinator. Representative Velthar, could you please speak with the human trade specialist? He's making some of our merchants nervous. Velthar sighed. I'll handle both issues. Send me the details. An hour later, he found himself walking through the station's marketplace with Choi Minho, the human who had identified himself as a trade analyst. Minho moved through the commercial area like he was conducting a survey, his eyes constantly noting details. Interesting setup you have here, Minho said, pausing at a Kentari mineral vendor. Do all resources flow through this central hub, or do you have secondary distribution points? Why do you ask? Professional curiosity. On Earth, we've found that centralized distribution creates certain vulnerabilities. Single points of failure, potential bottlenecks, opportunities for disruption. The way Minho said, opportunities for disruption made Velthar's crystalline structure resonate with unease. They passed a Vorthon textile merchant, and Minho studied the display with intense focus. These are beautiful. How do you handle quality? Control across different manufacturing worlds? Standard council protocols, Velthar replied. And if those protocols were interrupted? Alternative suppliers, backup systems? Why would protocols be interrupted? Minho shrugged. Market forces, economic changes, political shifts. On Earth, we've learned to plan for contingencies. They continued walking, but Velthar noticed that Minho's questions weren't random. He was mapping something: supply chains, dependencies, critical infrastructure points. His innocent curiosity was actually systematic intelligence gathering. At a Rillan food vendor, Minho asked about shipping schedules. At a technology dealer, he inquired about maintenance requirements. At a fuel depot, he wondered about storage, capacity, and reserve supplies. You know a lot about commerce for a first contact species, Velthar observed. We've had extensive experience with trade systems, Minho replied. Earth has always been a competitive environment. That evening, Velthar received a third communication, this one from station security. The message was marked urgent. Please report to Security Office 7 immediately. Velthar arrived to find Mordek reviewing security footage with two other officers. The reptilian security chief looked disturbed. We have a problem, Mordek said without preamble. Watch this. The screen showed the station's diplomatic recreation area. Several alien representatives were engaged in typical leisure activities. Reading, playing games, discussing culture. The humans were scattered throughout the area, apparently relaxing. Notice anything unusual? Mordek asked. Velthar studied the footage. The humans appeared to be socializing normally. Park Sumin was talking with Zilov near the reading area. Choi Minho was playing some kind of strategy game with a Thuvelian ambassador. Lee Jae-won was simply sitting quietly, apparently, reading. I don't see it. Watch their eyes, Mordek interrupted. Velthar looked closer. Now he saw it. While the humans appeared to be focused on their immediate activities, their eyes constantly moved. They tracked every person who entered or left the area. They noted conversations, interactions, body language. Each human was simultaneously engaged in their activity while conducting comprehensive surveillance of everyone around them. They're watching everyone, Velthar said. Constantly. But, more than that, watch this section. Mordek highlighted a portion of the recording. A minor argument had broken out between two junior diplomats from different species. Nothing serious, just a disagreement about trade protocols. In the footage, all three humans immediately shifted, their attention to the argument. But they didn't just watch, they studied. Their expressions became intensely focused as they analyzed the body language, vocal patterns, and interaction dynamics of the arguing diplomats. They're learning, Mordek said. Every social interaction is data for them. They're building some kind of behavioral database. That could be simple curiosity about alien cultures. Could be. But look at this. The next footage showed the recreational area 3 days later. The same two diplomats were present, but this time they were chatting pleasantly. Park Sumin approached them with drinks and somehow inserted herself into their conversation. Within minutes, she had the two diplomats discussing details about their respective governments' military capabilities, economic policies, and strategic concerns. Information that should never be shared in casual conversation. She used what she learned from their previous argument. Mordek explained. She knew exactly how each of them thought, what motivated them, what made them comfortable, enough to talk freely. Velthar watched Sumin work with growing alarm. She wasn't just making conversation. She was conducting interrogation so subtle that her targets didn't realize it was happening. There's more, Mordek continued. Yesterday, we detected 3 individuals attempting to access restricted areas of the station. They were planning to sabotage the water recycling system. Sabotage? Who? 3 Korthak separatists, anti-council extremists. They've been planning this for months. How did you catch them? Mordek paused. We didn't. Lee Jae-won did. The security chief pulled up another recording. This one showed Lee Jae-won walking through a maintenance corridor, apparently lost. He turned a corner and encountered 3 aliens working on what was clearly unauthorized equipment near a water processing unit. What happened next made Velthar's entire structure vibrate with shock. Lee Jae-won moved faster than the recording could properly capture. In less than 3 seconds, all 3 saboteurs were unconscious on the floor. Jae-won hadn't used any weapons, just his hands, applied with surgical precision to what appeared to be pressure points on each alien's anatomy. How? Did he know where to strike? Velthar asked. These are 3 different species with completely different physiologies. That's what we're trying to figure out, Mordek said grimly. He disabled each one using techniques specifically adapted to their species' nervous systems, techniques that should have required years of study. Maybe he's a doctor. We checked. His diplomatic credentials list him as an administrative aide. Velthar studied the footage again. After disabling the saboteurs, Lee Jae-won had calmly contacted station security and waited for them to arrive. When they asked how he had known about the sabotage attempt, He simply said he had noticed unusual activity patterns. "There's something else," Mordek added. "We interviewed the saboteurs after they regained consciousness. They said Jawan spoke to each of them in their native languages. Perfect pronunciation, complete fluency. Many diplomats are linguists. He used military terminology," Mordek said. "Specific combat phrases that civilians shouldn't know. When he spoke to the Korthak, he used the dialect of their warrior caste." Velthar left the security office with his mind spinning. The humans had been on the station for 1 week, and in that time they had systematically gathered intelligence on every species present, mapped the station's infrastructure and vulnerabilities, and demonstrated combat capabilities that rivaled trained security forces. But they had done it all while appearing to be nothing more than friendly diplomats interested in cultural exchange and trade opportunities. As Velthar walked back to his quarters, he passed the diplomatic recreation area. Through the transparent walls, he could see Yun Nayung, another human who had been introduced as a cultural attaché. She was sitting with a Gru Kekstar had seen many species join the Galactic Council over his long career as intelligence chief, but none had ever prompted him to conduct a full background investigation during their diplomatic visit. The humans were the first. He sat in his secure office deep within Station Harmony, surrounded by screens displaying data streams from across the galaxy. For 3 days, he had been digging into humanity's history, and what he found made his six-limbed form tremble with concern. The preliminary reports had described Earth as a peaceful world with a unified species ready for galactic integration. But the deeper Kekstar dug, the more disturbing the truth became. "Computer display Earth historical data, Section 7, he commanded. The screen filled with information that the human delegation had provided as part of their cultural exchange documentation. They had been remarkably transparent, offering detailed records of their civilization's development. At first glance, it looked like typical planetary history: the rise of agriculture, the development of cities, the growth of technology. But Kekstar had learned to read between the lines. "Computer, analyze frequency of armed conflicts in human history." The screen flashed red as calculations completed. "Warning, data indicates continuous warfare for recorded human history. Conflicts range from small tribal disputes to planetary-scale wars involving multiple nations and millions of casualties." Kekstar felt his stomach's churn. Continuous warfare? Most species had conflicts during their development, but continuous warfare would have driven any normal species to extinction. "Computer, analyze most recent major conflict. World War II, Earth years, 1939-1945. Estimated casualties, 70-85 million individuals. Conflict involved majority of Earth's nations and concluded with use of nuclear weapons. 70 million dead in a single conflict." Kekstar's appendages clicked nervously against his desk. The humans had achieved nuclear weapons and used them against their own species. "Computer, display conflicts after nuclear weapons development." The screen filled with a horrifying list. The humans hadn't stopped fighting after discovering weapons that could destroy their planet. They had simply gotten more sophisticated about it. Korean War, Vietnam War, Gulf War, Iraq War, Afghanistan War, the computer recited. Multiple proxy conflicts, regional disputes, and asymmetric engagements continuing through present day. Kekstar leaned back in his chair. Humans had spent decades fighting wars with nuclear weapons in their arsenals. They had developed the capability to destroy their own world, and then continued fighting anyway. "Computer, analyze human military technology development." Human military advancement shows exponential growth curve. Technologies include guided missile systems, stealth aircraft, satellite-based surveillance, cyber warfare capabilities, autonomous weapon systems, and advanced logistics networks. Display human military organizational structures. What appeared on screen made Kekstar's fears crystallize into absolute terror. Humans didn't just fight wars, they had turned warfare into a science. Their military organizations were sophisticated, beyond anything the Council had ever seen. Professional armies with specialized training programs. military academies that studied warfare as an academic discipline, defense industries that treated weapons development as a commercial enterprise, intelligence agencies that gathered information across the globe, computer, cross-reference human diplomatic delegation with military databases. The results confirmed Kekstar's worst suspicions. Kim Do-hyun, former colonel in human military, specializing in strategic planning and international relations, combat experience in multiple conflicts. Park Soo-min, former military intelligence officer, expertise in psychological, operations and interrogation techniques. Lee Jae-won, special forces operative, trained in close combat, survival, and reconnaissance. Choi Min-ho, military logistics specialist, expert in supply chain analysis and infrastructure assessment. Yoon Na-young, psychological warfare specialist, trained in cultural manipulation and propaganda. Every single human diplomat was actually a trained military professional. Earth hadn't sent diplomats at all. They had sent a reconnaissance team. Kekstar activated his secure communication system and sent an urgent message to Rivash, the only council representative with recent military experience. The Corvalin warrior arrived within an hour. "You requested emergency consultation," Rivash said, his scarred hide showing the ritual marks of his warrior caste. "What threatens the council?" "The humans," Kekstar said simply. Rivash's 4 eyes blinked in surprise. "The peaceful trade delegation? Look at this data." For the next hour, Kekstar walked Rivash through his findings. The warrior's expression grew darker with each revelation. "They're not traitors," Rivash said finally. "They're scouts. That's my assessment. Show me their current activities." Kekstar pulled up the surveillance reports. "They've systematically gathered intelligence on every species present, mapped our infrastructure, identified security vulnerabilities, and demonstrated combat capabilities that exceed our station security." "What kind of combat capabilities?" Kekstar showed him the footage of Lee Jae-won disabling the saboteurs. Rivash watched it 3 times, his expression growing more troubled each time. "Those are killing techniques," Rivash said. "He disabled them, but each strike could have been lethal. He chose to subdue rather than kill, which means he's not defensive, he's restrained. There's a difference." Rivash studied the footage again. "Show me their equipment." "They claim to bring only diplomatic materials. Scan their possessions anyway." The scans revealed another disturbing truth. The humans' diplomatic pouches contained equipment that looked innocuous but had military applications. Communication devices with encryption capabilities far beyond civilian needs. Analysis tools that could assess everything from structural engineering to chemical composition. Medical supplies that included combat drugs and field surgery equipment. "They came prepared for war," Rivash said, "but they're acting like diplomats." "Which is more terrifying?" Rivash replied. "A species that attacks openly is predictable. A species that disguises warfare as diplomacy is evolutionary superior." Kekstar pulled up more data. "Look at their planet's current status." The screen showed Earth's current state. 8 billion humans living in complex urban centers, connected by global communication networks, supported by industrial systems that could produce everything from computer chips to spacecraft. "They unified their entire world," Kekstar said. 8 billion individuals, hundreds of different cultures, dozens of different governments, and they made it work. How? By turning competition into a systematic process. They created global economic systems that reward efficiency and innovation. They established international organizations that manage conflicts before they become wars. They built communication networks that connect every individual on their planet. Rivash studied the data with growing alarm. They didn't just conquer their world, they optimized it. And now they want to join the galactic community. To optimize it too, Rivash concluded. Kekstar displayed one final piece of information: human corporations. Look at their commercial organizations. The screen filled with data about human business entities, companies with thousands of employees, operating across multiple continents, competing for market share through sophisticated strategies. They turn commerce into warfare, Kextar said. Hostile takeovers, market penetration, competitive intelligence, strategic partnerships. They use the language of battle to describe business. Because for them, it is battle, Rivash said. They've taken their warlike nature and channeled it into economic competition, which explains their diplomatic approach. Rivash nodded grimly. They're not here to trade or seek protection. They're here to expand their territory. But instead of using armies, they're using economics and politics. Kextar pulled up the final piece of his investigation, an analysis of human cultural exports. Music, movies, literature, and art that human corporations had been broadcasting into space for decades. They've been studying us long before official contact, he said. Every piece of human entertainment that mentioned aliens was actually intelligence gathering. They've been analyzing our responses to their cultural products, learning our psychology, preparing their approach. The business suits, Rivash said suddenly. What about them? They're not costumes, they're uniforms. Professional hunters wear appropriate gear for their prey. Kextar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. You think they see us as prey? I think they see us as a market to be captured, Rivash corrected. Which might be worse. Should we recommend rejection of their application? Rivash was quiet for a long moment. Can we? What do you mean? Look at your own data, Rivash said. They've spent 1 week on this station and already established relationships with every major delegation. They've identified our power structures, our economic dependencies, our security vulnerabilities. If we reject them now, what stops them from using that information against us? Kextar reviewed his surveillance reports with new understanding. The humans hadn't just been gathering intelligence, they had been positioning themselves for either acceptance or conquest. We invited apex predators to a diplomacy conference, Carr. The emergency council session convened at dawn, station harmony time. Representatives from 12 major species gathered in the secure conference chamber, their various forms creating a rainbow of alien physiology around the circular table. Velthar had never seen so many council members look genuinely afraid. Kextar stood at the chamber's center, his 6 limbs manipulating holographic displays that filled the room with disturbing data. Fellow representatives, he began, we face an unprecedented situation. The human delegation is not what they appear to be. Baxthor, the ancient historian whose species had maintained galactic records for millennia, raised one gnarled appendage. Intelligence chief, surely you're being overly cautious. They seem like typical newcomers seeking trade partnerships. That's exactly what makes them dangerous, Kextar replied. He activated a hologram showing Earth's history. Computer, display human warfare statistics. The chamber filled with numbers that made several representatives gasp audibly. Continuous conflicts spanning thousands of years. Weapons that grew progressively more destructive. Military organizations that treated killing as a professional discipline. They fight constantly, whispered Nelvira, the pacifist representative whose species had abandoned violence eons ago. How do they even survive as a civilization? By getting better at it, Rivash answered from his position near the security console. They don't just fight, they evolve through combat. Every conflict makes them more efficient. Kextar changed the display to show human military technology. Notice the progression. They developed nuclear weapons in 1945, Earth years. Within decades, they had intercontinental missiles, satellite guidance systems, stealth technology, and cyber warfare capabilities. But they've had no external threats, Baxthor observed. All this military development was for fighting each other. Exactly, Kextar said. They turned their own planet into a training ground for warfare. 8 billion individuals competing for resources, territory, and dominance. Only the most successful strategies survived. The display shifted to show human corporations. Then they took those same competitive strategies and applied them to commerce. Hostile takeovers, market penetration, strategic partnerships. They use military terminology because for humans, business is warfare by other means. Thexan gurgled nervously through his breathing apparatus. But they're here for peaceful trade? Are they? Kextar pulled up the surveillance footage from the past 2 weeks. Let me show you what they've actually been doing. The chamber watched in growing horror as Kextar documented the humans' systematic intelligence gathering. Every conversation had been strategic. Every cultural exchange had revealed vital information about alien psychology and capabilities. Every innocent question had mapped another aspect of galactic infrastructure. They've identified our command structures, our economic dependencies, our military capabilities, and our psychological vulnerabilities, Kextar concluded. In 2 weeks, they've gathered more intelligence about the Council than most species learn in years of membership. Perhaps they're naturally curious, suggested Mordek, though his scales had shifted to the deep purple of unease. Computer, display human delegation backgrounds, Kextar commanded. When the true identities of the human diplomats appeared, the chamber fell silent. Military officers, intelligence operatives, psychological warfare specialists, all disguised as peaceful envoys. They sent a reconnaissance team, Rivash said bluntly. Professional soldiers conducting pre-invasion intelligence gathering. But invasion for what purpose? Nelvira asked. What could they possibly want from us? Oh, Sungmin chose that moment to enter the chamber. The human had requested permission to address the council, which was granted according to standard diplomatic protocols. But as he walked to the center of the chamber, Velthar noticed something different about his demeanor. The friendly diplomat was gone, replaced by someone who moved with absolute confidence and spoke with deadly precision. Honored representatives, Sungmin began. I understand you have concerns about humanity's intentions. You could say that, Rivash replied curtly. Sungmin smiled, but it wasn't the calculated diplomatic smile they'd seen before. This was the smile of someone who held all the cards. Earth values transparency in our relationships. You've discovered that our delegation has military backgrounds. This is correct. You lied to us, Nelvira accused. We told you exactly who we are, Sungmin corrected. Kim Do-yoon is our lead diplomat. He's also a former military strategist. Park Soo-min is our chief negotiator. She's also trained in intelligence operations. We never claimed otherwise. Kextar realized with growing dread that the human was right. They had never lied. They had simply allowed the council to make assumptions. What do you want? Velthar asked directly. Partnership, Sungmin replied. Earth believes the galaxy has tremendous potential that's currently being wasted through inefficient resource allocation and suboptimal organizational structures. The way he said suboptimal made it sound like a terminal diagnosis. We don't need optimization, Baxthor said stiffly. The council has maintained peace for centuries. Peace, yes, Sungmin agreed. But at what cost? Your trade routes are inefficient. Your resource distribution creates artificial scarcities. Your decision-making processes take years to resolve simple problems. Your military capabilities couldn't defend against a determined aggressor. There are no aggressive species in this region, Mordek protested. There are now, Sungmin said quietly. The words hung in the air like a physical threat. Velthar felt his crystalline structure begin to resonate with fear. Are you threatening us? Rivash demanded, his warrior instincts finally triggered. I'm offering you a choice, Sungmin replied calmly. Earth can help optimize galactic civilization. We're very good at making systems work more efficiently. And if we refuse, Sungmin's expression didn't change, but somehow the chamber felt colder. Earth will pursue its interests regardless of council cooperation. We'd prefer to work together, but we're prepared to work alone. Kang Hyejin entered the chamber at that moment, carrying a tablet that she handed to Sungmin. He glanced at it and smiled again. Actually, let me correct something, he said. Earth isn't working alone anymore. The display screens around the chamber lit up with data that made Velthar's worst fears materialize. Trade agreements between Earth and individual council species, defense partnerships, technology sharing arrangements, economic integration protocols. For the past 6 months, Sungmin explained, Earth has been establishing bilateral relationships with council members. We've found that individual species are much more flexible than the council bureaucracy. Kextar's appendages clicked frantically as he analyzed the data. These agreements create economic dependencies. Any species that tries to withdraw would face immediate shortages of critical resources. We prefer to call it integrated partnership, Hyejin said, speaking for the first time. Earth provides optimization services, advanced technology, and security guarantees. Our partners provide resources, market access, and cooperation. You've made yourselves essential, Velthar realized. We've made ourselves valuable, Sungmin corrected. There's a difference. Baxthor studied the agreements with growing alarm. These contracts, if we reject Earth's council membership, the economic disruption would be catastrophic. Earth hopes that won't be necessary, Sungmin said. We believe council membership would benefit everyone involved. And if it doesn't? Rivash asked. Lim. Dongwook entered the chamber, flanked by two other humans who had been introduced as technical advisors. Velthar now realized they were probably military officers. Earth has contingency plans, Dongwook said simply. We always have contingency plans. Such as? Kextar demanded. Resource interdiction, economic isolation, infrastructure disruption, political destabilization. Dongwook listed the options like menu items. We'd prefer none of these become necessary. You're describing warfare, Nelvira whispered. We're describing business, Dongwook corrected. On Earth, market competition requires comprehensive strategy. Sometimes that strategy becomes assertive. The humans had turned the chamber into a boardroom, and the council representatives into a management team being informed of a hostile takeover. The business suits suddenly made perfect sense. They were the professional attire of a species that had weaponized corporate strategy. What exactly are you proposing? Velthar asked, though he suspected he already knew. Earth joining the council, as a full member, Sungmin said, with appropriate representation on all major committees. We're particularly interested in the Resource Allocation Board, the Security Council, and the Trade Regulation Committee. In other words, they wanted control of the galaxy's resources, military, and economy. And in return? Baxthor asked. We'll optimize everything, Hyejin said with genuine enthusiasm. Improved trade routes, enhanced security systems, streamlined decision-making processes, better resource utilization, upgraded technology standards. Under human management, Rivash added grimly. Under human guidance, Sungmin corrected diplomatically. Kextar realized the true scope of humanity's strategy. They hadn't come to join galactic civilization, they had come to acquire it. The reconnaissance mission, the economic integration, the diplomatic pressure, it was all part of a comprehensive takeover strategy that made military conquest look primitive by comparison. The council chamber had never hosted a surrender ceremony before, but that's what Tevmiran was preparing for as he reviewed the final documents. As the council's chief legal advisor, he had spent 30 years drafting trade agreements, territorial accords, and diplomatic protocols. Never before had he written terms of institutional capitulation disguised as membership ratification. The humans are ready, announced his aide, a nervous Valerian whose appendages trembled as he spoke. They're waiting in conference room Alpha. Tevmiran gathered the documents and walked through Station Harmony's corridors one final time as a representative of an independent galactic government. In 12 hours, the council would vote to accept Earth's membership. The outcome was predetermined, not by democracy but by economic strangulation and strategic necessity. The past week had been a masterclass in systematic conquest without violence. 3 days after the emergency session, the Centauri Mining Consortium had experienced technical difficulties that delayed their resource shipments by 48 hours. Within hours, 17 council species faced critical shortages of rare minerals essential for everything from life support systems to industrial manufacturing. Earth had immediately offered emergency supplies from their strategic reserves, materials, that they somehow possessed despite being a first contact species. The crisis was resolved quickly, but the message was clear. Earth could turn off the galaxy's supply chains whenever they chose. The next day, several council species discovered that their communication networks were experiencing software compatibility issues with the new human technology they had integrated into their systems. Technical support was available, but only through Earth's specialized engineers. By the end of the week, 24 species had signed expanded trade agreements with Earth, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't afford not to. Tevmiran entered Conference Room Alpha to find the human delegation arranged around the table, with the same professional precision they brought to everything. Kim Do-yeon sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents on a tablet. Park Soo-min was speaking, quietly with Kang Hye-jin about implementation schedules. Lee Jae-won stood near the window, apparently admiring the view but actually positioned to monitor all entrances. Counselor Tevmiran, Do-hyun said, rising to greet him. Thank you for meeting with us before the formal vote. Mr. Do-hyun, Tevmiran replied, taking his seat. I assume you want to review the final membership terms. Actually, we wanted to discuss the transition process, Park Soo-min said. Earth is committed to making this integration as smooth as possible for all parties involved. Song Young-ho, whom the humans had introduced as their integration director, activated a holographic display that filled the room with organizational charts. We've prepared a comprehensive optimization plan for council operations. Tevmiran studied the charts with growing dread. The humans hadn't just planned to join the council, they had redesigned it entirely. As you can see, Young-ho continued, we've identified several inefficiencies in current council structure. The Resource Allocation Board currently takes an average of 127 days to approve distribution requests. Earth's analysis suggests this can be reduced to 12 days through streamlined processes. And who would manage these streamlined processes? Tevmiran asked, though he already knew the answer. Earth has extensive experience in resource optimization, Soo-min replied. We'd be happy to provide technical assistance during the transition. Period. Im Soo-young, their administrative oversight specialist, joined the presentation. We've also identified opportunities to improve the Security Council's response capabilities. Current protocols require unanimous approval for defensive actions, which creates dangerous delays during crisis situations. You're proposing to eliminate the unanimous consent requirement? We're proposing to implement majority rule with emergency override provisions, Soo-young clarified. Of course, Earth would be willing to accept the additional responsibility that comes with enhanced decision-making authority. Tevmiran realized they were systematically dismantling every democratic safeguard the council had built over centuries. Worse, they were doing it by offering to solve problems that hadn't existed until humans created them. What about the smaller species, he asked. Many council members have limited resources or specialized needs. We've prepared individualized integration plans for each species, Hye-jin said, pulling up another display. Earth believes in customized solutions that maximize each partner's unique contributions. The screen showed detailed profiles of every council species, complete with psychological assessments, economic analyses, and strategic recommendations. The humans had created a comprehensive database of how to manage each alien civilization. For example, Hye-jin continued, the Philarians excel at detail-oriented administrative tasks. We envision them playing a larger role in documentation and compliance monitoring. The Thuvelians have natural analytical abilities that would be perfect for our new data processing centers. You're assigning species to specific roles, Tevmiran observed. We're optimizing species deployment based on natural aptitudes, Young-ho corrected. It's more efficient than the current random assignment system. Do-hyun leaned forward. Counselor, Earth understands that change can be concerning, but consider the alternatives. The galaxy faces challenges that the current council structure simply cannot address effectively. What challenges? Resource depletion through inefficient allocation, economic stagnation due to outdated trade protocols, security, vulnerabilities from inadequate defense coordination, political paralysis caused by bureaucratic complexity. Do-hyun listed each problem like a doctor diagnosing terminal illness. Earth has solutions for all of these issues, but implementation requires authority commensurate with responsibility. And if the Council prefers to maintain current systems? ELV, humans exchanged those subtle glances that Tevmiran had learned to fear. Information passed between them in a split second of eye contact. The Council is free to make whatever decisions it believes are appropriate, Suman said carefully. Earth will respect the democratic process, but you'll also pursue your interest regardless of that process, Tevmiran said, remembering their earlier conversation. Earth has obligations to its trading partners, Do-hyun replied. We can't abandon species that depend on our resources and technology. That would be irresponsible. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Earth had made itself essential to so many species that excluding them would cause more damage than accepting them. The humans had achieved the perfect strategic position. They were now too valuable to reject and too dangerous to trust. Let me ask you directly, Tevmiran said. What does Earth ultimately want from galactic civilization? For the first time, in the conversation, Do-hyun hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was deciding how much truth to reveal. Earth wants the galaxy to reach its full potential, he said finally. We see tremendous capabilities being wasted through suboptimal organization. Species that could thrive are merely surviving. Resources that could fuel innovation are being squandered on bureaucracy. Technologies that could transform civilization are locked away by regulatory inefficiency. And Earth can fix all of this? Earth has a proven track record of optimization, Suman said. We turned a divided planet into a unified civilization. We eliminated resource wars through efficient allocation systems. We ended territorial conflicts through economic integration. We can do the same thing on a galactic scale. Under human leadership, Tevmiran clarified. Under human guidance, Do-hyun corrected diplomatically. Earth doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We want to optimize it. Tevmiran understood the distinction now. Rulers could be overthrown or replaced. Optimizers became permanently embedded in the systems they improved. Earth didn't want political control, they wanted structural control. What happens to species that don't adapt well to optimization? He asked. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Soo-young was the one who answered. Earth believes every species has valuable contributions to make. Our optimization processes are designed to help each civilization reach its maximum potential within the integrated system. And if a species chooses not to be optimized, that would be their decision, Do-hyun said gently. But optimization isn't optional for species that want to participate in the galactic economy. Market forces require efficiency. You're describing economic extinction for non-compliant species. We're describing natural selection. Lee Jae-won spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. Adaptation or elimination. It's the fundamental law of existence. The conference room fell silent. In that moment, Tevmiran finally understood what humanity represented. They weren't just another species seeking membership. They were evolution itself, dressed in business suits and armed with spreadsheets. The vote is tomorrow, he said finally. Yes, Do-hyun agreed. Earth looks forward to beginning our partnership with the Council. As Tevmiran left the conference room, he reflected on the elegant horror of humanity's strategy. They had conquered the area.